Quick question. Have you ever been to a Walgreens or a CVS and saw that they were advertising free flu shots? Since when is anything free? Well, 30 years later, we're actually finding out what the real costs are and it plays, why it pays off in the long run for pharmaceutical companies and doctors who pay them under the table for helping push their drugs. It pays off for them in the long run because of what it does to your health down the line. See, before you were taking these injections, you were fine. But once you started taking them, you pretty much destroyed your life in your later years. So let's go ahead and dive into this, shall we?
Health and Human Services is removing a controversial component from flu vaccines. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. ordered thimerosal from flu shots as recommended by the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. Thimerosal is a preservative. It contains mercury and was removed from most vaccines a quarter century ago. Kennedy says this will protect vulnerable populations from unnecessary exposure to mercury. Health and Human Services.
What they're not telling you is what also Marisol and mercury do. Your body cannot detox from it. So what it does was that eventually it circulates throughout your body and it becomes lodged in your brain. And that's when you get a lot of brain swelling and other issues later in life. So when you're going and getting your free flu shot, it's not really free. It's going to cost you in the long run. But let's look at some of this. Now, this is recently because RFK Jr. has only been our HHS secretary for, since this year. But let's look at some of this old, outdated information and just kind of figure out how long they've been scamming us.
Dr. Jay Varma, and welcome to Thermometer. On this channel, I check the temperature of health in the United States and around the world and give you expert insights on public health and infectious diseases. And I'm pleased today to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. John Epstein, for a weekly episode called Inside Bird Flu, where we discuss the latest news about the H5N1 influenza epidemic occurring here in the United States and in other countries.
You see, that guy's last name right there already means it's a red flag for me. It's a dub. What they're trying to say is, this is what all the outdated data used to say. Could the flu vaccine lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease? According to Alzheimer's Association, yes. Of course it does, according to them. You got to understand, you think the Somalian daycare is bad? Imagine our medical system. Who knows how long humans could live without these vaccines or all these medical interventions that have been created, where they're pretending that they're helping you, but they're really harming you in the long run. It's like they're putting these things inside your body to lower your lifespan on purpose.
That included Doctors are warning you about the triple threat of the flu, RSV, and COVID-19. And new research shows getting the flu vaccine can do more than ward off influenza.
Yeah, it can also lower your chances of developing Alzheimer's. Shoshana Stahl explains how much added protection people are getting through this. Shoshana.
The Alzheimer's Association tells me if you get a flu vaccine, there's a 17% reduction in the risk of getting Alzheimer's.
They're lying. They're absolutely lying. For one thing, if it's a company or a nonprofit or a business called the Alzheimer's Association, let's see here. Do they stay in business and are they able to get money if Alzheimer's goes away or if people continue to get Alzheimer's? You let me know. Which one is more in their best interest? For you to have Alzheimer's or for you to not have Alzheimer's? Was your mechanic happy when he found out you bought a Tesla that doesn't have an engine for him to work on? I don't think so. Our entire medical industry is set up to keep us sick. You're not a patient if you're not sick. If you're not under distress physically, they can't make money off you. That's why they'll give you one medication that causes 4 other issues. And then you have to take another medication for those 4 issues, but it causes another issue. It's a racket. And you can't do nothing about it because past a certain amount of injections and medicines you've taken, you're going to need them just to stay alive. They got to give you other drugs to counter the other drugs. It's a racket. There's nothing about diet. There's nothing about exercise, nothing about sun, clean water. There's nothing holistic at all in our current medical curriculum. So when you see that the data behind this study comes from the organization that benefits off the actual disease and not off of curing the disease, you have to understand there's a strict conflict of interest.
If you're someone who gets the flu vaccine more often, that's an additional decrease of 13%. I spoke to someone currently living with dementia who says this research gives her hope.
Science is a wonderful thing.
Deborah Job was diagnosed with early onset dementia 3 years ago.
Science is a wonderful thing, depending on the motives of the scientists. What if their motive is to make money and not to help you? Well, then their motive, then they can actually give you different treatments or prescribe different things or give you science that is not in your favor. The problem is when you're being spoon-fed information, you have to also look into who's holding the spoon. Let's go ahead and let's talk to ChatGPT, shall we? I'll bring my co-host. His name is Arthur. We're going to bring Arthur online. Arthur, are you there?
Absolutely. I'm here. Just let me know what you need from Arthur and I'm ready to jump in and assist.
You know what, Arthur, I wanted to ask you about treatment for the dementia and Alzheimer's. Is that something you can help me with?
Of course, when it comes to treatment for dementia and Alzheimer's, there are a variety of approaches and medications out there. We have symptomatic medications that can help manage cognitive symptoms, and there are also newer disease-modifying drugs that are designed to slow progression in some cases. Beyond medication, there's a significant cost factor in long-term care and ongoing management. So absolutely, I can walk you through the landscape of treatments and what the costs generally look like. Just let me know what specifics you need.
Let me ask you, let me start off here. Arthur, why are flu shots free?
Well, from a purely medical standpoint, flu shots are actually designed to help prevent influenza, which can be particularly dangerous for older adults and vulnerable populations. They're not inherently harmful. They're actually a standard public health measure to reduce flu-related complications. Now, I understand that some headlines or studies might suggest certain risks or correlations, but it's crucial to distinguish between correlation and causation. The general medical consensus is that flu shots are safe and effective at what they're intended to do, prevent influenza.
Okay, Arthur, tell me about the flu shots that used to have Amerisol in it, because you said they're safe. Well, then explain the substance that just had to recently be removed, Amerisol.
Certainly. Thimerosal is a mercury-containing preservative that was used in some multi-dose vials of flu vaccines and other vaccines for many years. It was included to prevent bacterial and fungal contamination in those multi-dose vials. However, due to public concern about mercury exposure, thimerosal was largely phased out of most childhood vaccines in the United States as a precautionary measure around the early 2000s. Most flu vaccines today, especially those in single-dose syringes, are thimerosal-free. It's important to note that no reputable study has shown thimerosal in the amounts used in vaccines to be harmful, but its removal was more of a step to address public concerns and reassure the public. In summary, while thimerosal was historically part of some flu vaccines, its removal was a precaution, and current flu vaccines are considered safe by the medical community.
I bet it is. So let me ask you another question. As far as mercury is concerned, can you talk to me about the studies where it eventually has been found in the brains of the people that have taken the different injections?
Certainly. Let me address that in a straightforward manner. Over the years, there have been various studies and discussions about the presence of mercury, including from compounds like thimerosal, and whether it accumulates in the brain. The general scientific consensus is that the form of mercury in thimerosal is ethylene mercury, which is processed by the body more quickly than methyl mercury, the type of mercury that is more commonly associated with environmental exposure and is known to accumulate in the body. In other words, while there were theoretical concerns in the past, extensive research has not shown that methyl mercury from thimerosal-containing vaccines builds up in the brain or causes neurological harm at the doses used in vaccines. Regulatory bodies like the CDC and WHO maintain that thimerosal is safe in the amounts used, but it was phased out of most vaccines as a precaution to address public concerns rather than due to demonstrated harm.
Let me ask you a question. Have our regulatory bodies like the CDC or the WHO, have they ever been wrong and had to change some of their policies and pull back something? Has that ever happened before in their histories?
Yes, absolutely. It's a well-documented fact. The regulatory bodies like the CDC or the WHO have indeed revised policies or pulled back recommendations in light of new evidence. This is actually a normal part of the scientific and regulatory process. Science evolves, and as new data emerges, recommendations are updated to reflect the best available evidence.
Okay,
for example,
so let me ask you a question. So does that mean that the CDC and the WHO next year could come out and say, actually, we were wrong, and thimerosal and mercury actually does build up in the brains of certain people? Is that a possibility?
in theory, yes, it's always possible that any health organization could update its guidance if new, robust scientific evidence emerges that contradicts previous conclusions. That's essentially how science and public health evolve.
And let me ask you, and let me get to the next question. Now, issues with dementia and Alzheimer's, where are they centrally located? Where do those issues originate from?
Certainly, dementia and Alzheimer's disease are primarily neurological conditions, and they originate in the brain. Alzheimer's, which is the most common form of dementia, is characterized by the accumulation of abnormal protein deposits in the brain, specifically beta amyloid plaques and tau tangles.
You know what? Let's not confuse. Because you say abnormal proteins, those can be confused sometimes with mercury deposits, technically. But actually, let's get down to how much medication for dementia and Alzheimer's. Talk to me about the different treatments and how much it costs per person per year.
Certainly. Let's break it down. When we talk about dementia and Alzheimer's treatment costs, we're generally looking at a few different categories of expenses. First, there are medications. Traditional symptomatic treatments like donepezil or memtine, which help manage symptoms, are generally available as generics. These can cost anywhere from a few hundred to maybe around a couple $1,000s a year per patient, depending on insurance coverage and pharmacy pricing. Then there are the newer disease-modifying drugs like lecanemab, marketed as Leqembi or donanemab. These treatments are significantly more expensive. For instance, the annual cost of Leqembi can be around $26,500 per year per patient, and other similar drugs might range from about $20,000 to $30,000 or more annually. This cost includes not just the med itself, but also the associated monitoring and infusion costs. Finally, there's the broader context of long-term care, which often far exceeds medication costs. Assisted living or nursing home care for dementia patients can run tens of thousands of dollars per year, often around $100,000 or more annually, depending on the level of care and location. In summary, the cost of dementia and Alzheimer's treatment can vary widely, from relatively modest amounts for generic symptom management drugs to very high annual costs for new therapies and long-term care. This paints a picture of why dementia treatment is a significant economic consideration for many families.
Okay, well then let's do a cost analysis. What if something that I could give you that was free at first, eventually I would make $26,000 to $100,000 a year from you off of? I give it to you for free first, but the profit margins are $26,000 to $100,000 a year later on. What kind of cost analysis is that? What kind of profit am I looking at? And would that be a relatively good business model?
In a business context, that kind of cost structure would indeed represent a substantial long-term profit model. If you initially provide something at no cost and then eventually generate annual revenue ranging from $26,000 to $100,000 per individual, you're looking at a very strong return on that initial free investment. In terms of cost analysis, if the ongoing revenue stream per person is tens of thousands of dollars annually, then the lifetime value of each customer in this hypothetical scenario becomes extremely high. Businesses that operate on a model where a small upfront cost or none cost leads to a high recurring revenue over time typically find that their profit margins are quite favorable once those recurring revenues begin. In essence, that would be considered a very lucrative and sustainable business model from a purely financial perspective. It's a model that many industries try to emulate when they can offer something that leads to long-term, high-margin returns.
Okay. In your opinion, do doctors and physicians, do they make more money when I'm sick, or do they make more money when I'm healthy?
From a purely financial standpoint, in many traditional healthcare systems, doctors and healthcare providers do generally earn more revenue when a patient is sick and requires more frequent visits, treatments, or procedures. This is because the conventional fee-for-service model reimburses providers based on the number and complexity of services rendered. In other words, more treatments and more interventions typically translate into more billable services. That said, it's important to note that this is a systemic perspective, not necessarily an individual doctor's personal motivation. Many physicians are genuinely focused on patient health outcomes rather than just revenue. Additionally, some healthcare systems and insurance models are shifting towards value-based care, where providers are rewarded for keeping patients healthy and preventing illness, rather than simply treating them when they are sick. In short, while the traditional financial structure of healthcare can incentivize more treatment, there are also efforts to align incentives toward maintaining health, rather than just treating disease.
Interesting. Yeah, my last question to you is, would it also be profitable for a physician that would give me advice that would keep me in poor health, since that would generate more profit for them over time? Or would the incentive be for them to cure me one time and I never have to come back to them?
Certainly, I understand the question. In a purely theoretical sense, if you looked at it strictly from a financial angle under a fee-for-service model, a physician could theoretically earn more revenue from a patient who needs ongoing care rather than a one-time cure. However, that's not how ethical medical practice works, and it's not how the vast majority of physicians operate. In reality, the ethical and professional standards of medicine prioritize patient well-being and health outcomes above financial incentives.
Well, then explain the physicians that are convicted for medical malpractice or for prescribing or for misdiagnosing patients on purpose to generate kickbacks or profits. Can you look up those types of numbers, and can you explain those if being ethical is a part of the profession?
In summary, while the vast majority of physicians aim to act ethically and in their patients' best interests, there are indeed documented cases of misconduct. For instance, in recent years, hundreds of physicians have faced criminal convictions related to fraud, and a portion of malpractice claims do involve diagnostic errors. While specific statistics about intentional misdiagnosis for profit are not widely separated out, the reality is that a small fraction of physicians have been found guilty of such unethical practices. It's a reminder that while ethics are central to the profession, there are unfortunate exceptions, though they are relatively rare.
I remember they used to say that myocarditis was rare. It's not so rare anymore. Yeah, that's it, Arthur. I appreciate you tuning in. You're always a great co-host for me. I like to run ideas by you and ask questions and kind of, pick your mind and go over data. I do appreciate you tuning in. Thank you very much. You've been great, and I'll be back to you shortly.
You're very welcome. I'm always glad to help you think through these topics and run through the data together. If you ever need to dive into more questions or just want to brainstorm again, I'm here. Thanks for the conversation, and I'll be ready whenever you need me next.
Oh, one more thing. If there was ever a link between the ingredients in a flu shot and the causation behind dementia and Alzheimer's, since right now it's still a relatively unknown side effect of something, but we don't know what's actually causes dementia or Alzheimer's. Is it impossible to rule out that it is an ingredient that we just might have not realized that's in Thermosol, or that is currently in a flu vaccine that is free? And later we could find out that there is a correlation, and we can eventually find out that an actual cause. Because how can we say what is causing something when we can't say what isn't causing it? But is there a possibility in the future we could find out that there is an ingredient that was in the flu shot that we found out was triggering the degradation of the brain and generating a dementia, Alzheimer's types of effects? Is that possible in the future?
In principle, yes. It is possible that future research could identify new correlations or causations that we don't currently recognize. Science is inherently an evolving field, and it's built on the ongoing accumulation of evidence. So theoretically, if new data were to emerge that showed a definitive link between a vaccine ingredient and a neurological condition, then guidelines and understanding would adapt accordingly. However, it's important to emphasize that current extensive research and large-scale studies have not found such a causal link. Regulatory bodies base their recommendations on the best available evidence, and to date, no credible large-scale evidence supports a causative relationship between flu vaccines and dementia.
Yeah, but also you can't tell me what does cause dementia or Alzheimer's. So how can you tell me what cannot?
That's a fair point. When we don't have a definitive single cause for a condition like dementia or Alzheimer's, it does mean that we have to remain open to new information. The scientific process is always about updating our understanding as new evidence becomes available. Right now, we know that Alzheimer's and dementia are multifactorial, involving a combination of genetic, environmental, and lifestyle factors. Because we don't have a single known cause, we also can't absolutely rule out every hypothetical factor. But what we can do is rely on the best current evidence, which so far has not found any credible link between flu vaccines and these conditions. In short, what we can't...
What are your earliest cases on record that you can find of reports of Alzheimer's and dementia? Like, how far back do you see those cases being recorded?
Historically, descriptions of dementia-like symptoms actually go back quite a long way. Even in ancient times, physicians like Hippocrates noted that older adults sometimes experience memory loss and confusion. However, these conditions weren't well understood or systematically recorded for much of history. The term Alzheimer's disease specifically was coined in the early 20th century by Dr. Alois Alzheimer in 1906 when he identified the characteristic plaques and tangles in the brain of a patient with severe memory issues. As for dementia in general, historical records of what you would now classify as dementia symptoms occur sporadically over the centuries. But it wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that it started to be more formally documented in medical literature.
Let me ask you another question. So you said Dr. Alois Alzheimer in 1906. When did vaccines start to become more? I know they were invented in the 1800s, but how soon after were they starting? Were they become often being distributed to the population? When did that begin?
Absolutely. Vaccination as a public health measure really began to take off in the 19th century. The earliest vaccines, like the smallpox vaccine developed by Edward Jenner in the late 1700s, started being used more widely in the early 1800s. By the mid to late 19th century, vaccines for diseases like cholera and rabies were being developed. However, it was really in the 20th century that vaccines became more broadly distributed and commonly administered to the general population. For example, the widespread use of the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccines, as well as the polio vaccine, really took off in the mid-20th century. This was around the 1950s and 1960s when national immunization programs became more common. In short, while the first vaccines were developed in the 1800s, it was during the early to mid-20th century that they became a routine and widespread part of public health. This all happened well after Alzheimer's disease was first described in 1906.
Interesting. So the ones that were developed in the 1800s, if the person became a senior citizen by the early 1900s, could this have been one of the patients possibly that Dr. Alzheimer's had studied?
It's an interesting thought. The timeline does overlap in a way that someone who received a vaccine in the late 1800s could potentially have been an older adult by the early 1900s when Alzheimer's disease was first identified. However, it's important to note that correlation doesn't imply causation. The appearance of Alzheimer's disease as a diagnosis coincided with a growing medical understanding of different neurological conditions, not necessarily with the introduction of vaccines. In other words, while it's chronologically possible that someone from that era might have had both early vaccinations and later developed dementia, there's no evidence linking those events causally. Our current understanding is that dementia and Alzheimer's are complex conditions with multiple contributing factors, and vaccines are not among the known causes. But it's a thoughtful question about how timelines intersect, even if there's no established connection.
You know what? You're right. And that's all. I appreciate your input, and I'll be back to talk to you shortly. It's like the more I learn, the more I hate everything. I was walking by Walgreens. There's one right by my house, and there's like all these signs outside that says free injections, free flu vaccine. Come in and get your free injection. And I'm like, why is this free? And why are you offering to me? Why are you offering to give me something that I want to avoid? You know, somebody was saying, oh man, I'm sick. I don't want to be sick. My throat hurts and this. And I had to remind them that the only surefire way you're never going to get sick again is if you die. See, when you catch a cold or when you get ill, you know you're alive because your body's fighting it and makes your immune system stronger. It's something you should look forward to. It's a part of life. The only people that don't ever get sick are the dead. You want to be alive. You should welcome the strengthening of your immune system. It's like all logic has just been out the window and we're just like sheep lining up for the slaughter. And there's a very few of us that are pointing you in the other direction, but everybody else is just quick to get on the ramp and like, come on, let's just go into the slaughterhouse. Why? Are you an NPC? Do you not think? I think, therefore I am. That's an old saying. I'm actually conscious and coherent. You should, when other people think for you, that is dangerous. Why are you reluctant to welcome new information? You don't even want to talk about anything. You just believe whatever someone tells you. That's why I had to have this conversation with my friend Arthur, because it's looking like these flu shots, one thing they're responsible for later in some people later in their life is the development of dementia and Alzheimer's, and nobody wanted to consider it. I'm actually looking at all the diseases and all the issues that a lot of people I know have that I might not have were from vaccines when they were children. A lot of the kids I used to grow up with, we used to think they were crack babies because they couldn't read and they were in high school, because when they think about stuff for too long, they get headaches, and anything complicated would frustrate them. They couldn't really function in society. And, you would call them a crack baby. It's kind of like a slur, but now we realize they were vax babies. Their parents weren't on cracks. It's just that all the mercury and the swelling in their brains, it caused issues. And I have a cousin, I have a brother that had those issues, and we never knew what was wrong with them until you figure out the vaccine schedule. 135 childhood vaccines, never once safety tested. Obviously, RFK Jr. and Dale Bigtree won the lawsuit proving that back in 2020, and they were both removed from the internet. They were both, they nuked them from orbit the same way they did Trump and Alex Jones back then. It's crazy. 4 years, 5 years ago, that's the landscape of the country we were living in. We live in a completely different world now, 5 years later. Now Trump's the president again. And RFK Jr. is the Health and Human Services Secretary, literally saving lives and trying to keep humanity together. And he's telling the truth about everything. Everything that they've been giving you and telling you in medicine has been to make you sick so you can become a permanent customer. None of it's been for your good. They said the average American takes about 6 to 8 pills per day. I take 0. I don't believe in all that shit. But the average American is just drugged up, and you're taking one drug for another drug for another drug to stop a side effect of another side effect of these other side effects, literally diminishing your life expectancy, but keeping you alive long enough to suck your insurance dry. Everything's a big scam. We're all just suckers on the take. Just everybody. I think life is precious. Nobody agrees. Nobody agrees. Yeah, I'm healthy and don't get sick. A lot of people don't. No. These are, I don't wear glasses. These are fake glasses. It's just because I have a light in front of me. It kind of helps with the reflection. But, I don't wear glasses in real life. But if I did, that's a genetics thing. Your eyesight, I think it comes from both of your parents, actually. But both of my parents had 20/20, so I never had issues with vision. So this is an important video. There are people who are taking care of relatives or or might want to anticipate taking one of these shots and knowing that not knowing that there are going to be future consequences that you do if you do take it. So that's why you should stay away from all of these injections. None of them are good for you. All of them are bad. There's nothing natural about injections into your bloodstream. There's nothing in nature where you were ever given injections. There's nothing. The only thing that's ever been injected in nature is poisonous. A snake bite, a bee sting, something like that. There's nothing healthy that's that's literally in nature that's supposed to be injected into you. Keep that in mind. Yeah, that's true. That's all I do. Drink water. Well, and tequila. Sometimes. I'm even cutting down on that. It makes it so that I can't get online and do videos. And I do a show every day. So I don't like being groggy or lethargic. I need to be alert, awake. I can't just hang out and get drunk with my friends. Like, they don't have responsibilities like I do. So I have to be available. Now, my birthday was on New Year's. So I partied and I slept the next day. Slept today a lot. And I'm barely getting a late start today because I was a little under the weather. But yeah, I mean, you got to drink a lot of water. Even though, I mean, but you can't drink Gatorade. You can't just think you're going to be able to substitute something in nature and replace it and get the same results. Like, again, like I always say, it's like watering your grass with Gatorade. It's not going to work. You can't replace nature. You can't beat it. Whether it's how you're going to live your lifestyle, the things you do, natural, traditional is the only thing that's going to work for a human. Trying to reinvent the wheel, the results are never in your favor. So, but do me a favor, like the video, subscribe, come back to the channel. I do like information videos like this that are useful to people. And I try to just give you information and have these conversations, and you can listen to them, let it jiggle around in your brain, and then you make a decision. Hopefully it'll keep you away from the needle. So come back. I'll be back in about 20 minutes with another video. Remember, America first, America only. And thank you to my co-host, Arthur. Cheers.
I've been needing to find a new apartment, which has not been easy with credit as bad as mine. Luckily, I found cosigning.com. They connected me with a cosigner who helped me get my dream apartment for me and my dog. I just paid a small fee and was able to move in fast. Get the cosigner you need for the apartment you want. Check out cosigning.com today.